You know that feeling when you log on to an alt for the first time? Open your spellbook and just stare at your action bars trying to figure out where everything should go. You spend 20 minutes dragging abilities around, you play a few games, and it still doesn't feel right, so you move things again and again. And 2 weeks later, you're still looking at your bars mid-arena instead of looking at the game. The reason this happens is simple. There's no system behind your binds, no logic, no philosophy. Just a random collection of keys you picked once and never thought about again. Well, today, we're going to fix that. We're going to walk you through the exact binding philosophy that lets top players swap between any spec, using a Ret Paladin, a Frost Mage, and a Disc Priest as our examples, without skipping a beat. So log into the game, park yourself next to a target dummy, and clear your action bars. Yeah, all of them. We're starting from scratch. Now, before we get into step 1, if you're clearing your action bars and starting from scratch with your keybinds, chances are your UI could use the same treatment. That's exactly why we built the skill-capped add-on package. One click and your entire UI is configured, optimized for PvP and ready to go. Every add-on, every setting, all handled for you. And with everything installed, this is what your UI will look like. Clean, balanced, and optimized for PvP, with every add-on automatically configured for you. And if you're a skill cap member, well, you'll get access to even more, including our cooldown manager profiles that configure your buffs and procs automatically for every class and spec, ready to go the moment you log onto any character. Alongside our Arc UI profile that completely overhauls the Blizzard cooldown manager, splitting your offensives and defensives into separate groups. You also get premium talent import strings for every spec and even an in-game BIS list, both of which are constantly kept up to date as the season progresses. Plus, your premium code unlocks unlimited arena coach analysis, every game recorded, every mistake identified, an automatic coaching tool that tells you exactly what to work on. Everything we offer is backed by our rank up guarantee. If you don't gain at least 400 rating while using our service, you'll get a full refund, no questions asked. So once you're done here and your keybinds are all set, that's the perfect time to pair them with our add-on package to get your whole UI cleaned up too, using the discount link in the description. All right, let's get into it. Before we touch a single bind, there's one setting you need to get right. This part is quick because the advice hasn't changed in a decade, but if you skip it, everything else we teach you today will feel worse than it should. First, if you're already strafing with A and D, great, keep them. There's no reason to change something that works and go through the pain of relearning your movement binds for no real benefit. But if you're still keyboard turning, and if A and D are set to turn left and right, you need to fix that now. You've got two choices, set Q and E as your strafe keys, or rebind A and D from turn to strafe. Both work. If you need someone to pick for you, use Q and E. They sit right next to your numbered keys, which is where your rotation is going to live. So it's much easier to strafe and press abilities at the same time. A and D as strafe is totally fine too, it just means your fingers have to travel a bit further to reach those rotation keys while moving around. Either way, strafing, not turning, that goes without question. You should also take a second now to set your camera following style to never. You want full camera control at all times, and this lets you look in one direction while moving in another, without automatically resetting your camera angle if you let go of your mouse. This is extremely important because of how important jumping is in WoW. Beyond the obvious, jumping lets you carry your momentum while freeing your fingers to hit binds. If you're holding Q to strafe away and you turn your camera towards the enemy to see them, you can jump in the direction you're running in and your character will keep moving forward in the air. This gives you just enough time to use an instant ability before continuing to hold down your strafe key as you land. One more tip before we get into our binds, especially for melee players, is to actually bind start auto run. This can be completely game-changing for melee, as you can literally make sure your character keeps moving forward while you're free to press other keys. Getting your movement keys right is the first step to playing Arena properly, but movement is just one piece of the puzzle. Knowing where to move, that's where you start climbing. Over at Skillcapped, we've got a full set of positioning courses that break down everything from understanding how arena maps work to melee and ranged DPS positioning, healer positioning, and how to exploit line of sight both offensively and defensively. These courses teach you how the best players in the world use positioning to win games, and if you're serious about climbing an arena, positioning is one of the first things you should be working on. Alright, before we put a single ability on our bars, we need to figure out what keys we're actually going to use. Think of this like building the shelves before you put anything on them. If you skip this step and just start dragging abilities onto random keys, you're going to end up exactly where you started, a mess with no logic behind it. So here's what we're working with. Everyone starts with 1 through 5. Those are your core binds. They're the closest to your movement keys and you'll constantly be pressing them. Now you need to make a few choices that are going to shape the rest of your layout. First, tilde or 6. Tilde is the key to the left of 1. Some people love it, some people never touch it. 6 is a big stretch, but some of you have been using it for years. Pick one. If you've never used either, we'd lean tilde. It sits outside the 1 through 5 sequence, which actually makes it useful for abilities that relate to your rotation but work differently. An AoE ability, an execute you occasionally press, or a utility spell that supports your main damage. Your brain processes it as connected to 1 through 5, but not part of it. Next, this is where the strafe decision from earlier matters. If you strafe with Q and E, that frees up R, T, F, and G as natural quadrant. Those 4 keys sit together, and they're all reachable without much movement from your hand. This quadrant is incredibly powerful because you can group 4 related abilities there, like your CC kit and offensive utility. If you strafe with A and D instead, you get Q and E back as usable binds, which gives you more of a row, QERTFG. Some people still end up treating RTFG as a quadrant anyway and using Q and E for utility. It basically depends on the specs you play and how much CC you have to bind. So at this point, you've got your numbered keys, your quadrant and row, and that gives you somewhere between 10 and 12 base keys. But we're not done. We still need Z, X, C, and V. These 4 are special. They're going to be your defensive and trinket row. If you don't already have a PvP trinket bind that's burned into your mind, we highly suggest putting on V. We'll explain why in a second, but Z, X, and C are your panic buttons. Defensives, big cooldowns, the abilities you press a handful of times per game, but need to hit instantly without modifiers getting in the way. And that's the important part. Outside of a few special circumstances, we are not going to put modifiers on these keys. No Shift V, no Control C. The reason is simple. Your trinket on V needs to always be your trinket, no matter what modifier you're holding. If you're pressing Shift to interrupt your focus target, but you need to trinket at the same time to do it, not having a modifier on V means it will always work. But if you had something else bound to Shift V, you wouldn't be able to trinket and interrupt your focus target at the exact same time. Same logic for your defensives. When you're at 10% health, you're going to hit X faster than Shift X. Now, because 12 to 16 base keys isn't enough to cover every spell you need in Arena, it's time to multiply our keys, and that's where modifiers come in. Shift is generally the best modifier key for most people, and so for every base key on your main row, 1 through 5, tilde or 6, and your quadrant and row keys, you're going to have a shift version sitting right above them on your action bar. Shift 1, Shift 2, Shift 3, all the way through Shift G. Then you need a second modifier. The choice is between Control and Alt. Here's how you figure out which one works for you. Put your hand on your movement keys. Now press Control 1, 2, 3. Then press Alt 1, 2, 3. Whichever feels better, use that one. Rule out the other and don't go back. For most people, Control is going to win here. Alt with your thumb works fine for a few binds, but once you get to binds like Alt 4 and Alt 5, most people can't reach those comfortably while still being able to quickly move their hand around the keyboard to hit other keys. Control with your pinky gives you way more range, but if you're someone that presses Control with your palm instead of your pinky, it's probably going to feel awful. This is personal. There is genuinely no universal right answer. Now, there's one more decision to make here, and it matters. Are you going to use that second modifier on your numbered keys, on your letter keys, or both? This comes down to 2 things. If you add Control to your number row, you get a clean third tier. Base rotation on 1 through 5, shift cooldowns above that, and then Control 1 through 5 for a third category. This is especially powerful for healers, as you can have your heals on 1 through 5, your healing cooldowns on shift, your damage on Control. The mental mapping here is super clear. It's also great for hybrids to have off healing on the Control numbered keys, and even for casters with spammable CC to put Arena 1, 2, 3 binds on Control 1, 2, 3. But some of you won't like the reach. Control 4 and Control 5 are a stretch, and if that feels bad, just skip it. Keep your second modifier on the letter keys only. Control Q, E, or A, D, and RTFG. When it comes to actually mapping out your binds on your action bars, there are 2 viable approaches. The first and arguably better way, especially if you want to have an easier time learning and remembering your binds, is to literally lay out every modifier bind on a visible action bar. Shift F gets its own slot. Control F gets its own slot. You can see every single ability on screen. This is great for learning because there's nothing hidden. Everything is right there in front of you. If you're setting up binds for the first time, do it this way. The second approach is to use modifier macros. Instead of having Shift 1 as a separate bar slot, you make macro on your one key that does one thing normally and a different thing when you hold Shift. The icon changes on the fly. This keeps your bars clean. Fewer action bars on screen, but the trade-off is you can't see the modifier ability until you're actually holding the modifier. This makes it harder to learn, but cleaner once you've got the muscle memory. We definitely suggest starting off with your modifier keys bound directly, and you can then look for opportunities in the future to collapse binds into macros later on. Speaking of macros, if you want to really understand how these work and start building your own, We've got an entire course dedicated to exactly this. It covers everything from general macro essentials to conditional macros, modifier macros, help harm macros, and everything in between. Good macros go hand in hand with good keybinds, and this course will teach you how to build them yourself from scratch. And if you're a SkillCap Premium member, you also get access to our Premium Discord, which includes a dedicated macro request channel. If you can't figure out how to make a specific macro yourself, one of our team will build it for you. We're now ready to actually put abilities on these keys. The shelves are built, it's time to fill them. For this walkthrough, we're going to start with the version that does not use control on the numbered keys. It's simpler and it works for every class, but we'll still show you how you can incorporate these later on if they feel right for you. Let's start with the single most important rule. Your best keys go to the abilities you press the most, not the most important ones, the most frequently used ones. A mistake that people make way too often when setting up their binds is they put their most important abilities on the binds they have the best access to while their fingers hover around their movement keys. Putting Ice Block on 4 might seem smart, but you're literally pressing this a couple times per match. Instead, the keys closest to your movement keys should be reserved for things you're constantly using. Those go on 1 through 5. Frequency determines placement. Alright, so the first thing you're going to do is open your spellbook. Retail WoW makes this easy. Any ability that isn't bound yet will have a glow around it. Find your rotational abilities, the stuff you're constantly pressing. No long cooldowns, no burst, just your core abilities. If you're not sure what these are, our class guides over at skillcap.com are the perfect place to start. Now, before you drag them onto your bar, you need to pick an ordering philosophy. There are a few ways to do this, and they are all valid. Some people go left to right in terms of priority. The thing you press first goes on 1, the thing you press next goes on 2, and so on. That works, but the approach we'd recommend is builder into spender. Your spammable generators go on the left, and your finishers and spenders go on the right. The stuff you're pressing the most ends up on the most accessible keys, and there's a natural left to right flow to your rotation. Let's walk through it. As a ret, we've got 5 rotational abilities. Crusader Strike or Templar Strike is our lowest cooldown builder. That goes on 1. Blade of Justice can then go on 2, as it's simply another generator. We can then put Judgment onto 3. It's a builder with a maintenance feel, as you're keeping its debuff active, and your finisher, Final Verdict, depends on it. Then our spenders. Final Verdict on 4, Divine Storm on 5. They're next to each other, which is nice. Single target spender and AoE spender sitting side by side. And that's the pattern we'll always try to build towards. Left to right, we're building and then we're spending. Frost Mage is even more straightforward. Frostbolt on 1, that's our builder, the thing we're spamming to generate procs. Flurry on 2, when Frostbolt gives us a Brain Freeze proc, we press 2. And Ice Lance on 3, Fingers of Frost proc, press 3 to use up the damage amp from Flurry. It's a natural chain, 1, 2, 3. Build, proc, consume. That leaves Blizzard, and this is a perfect candidate for Tilda. It's related to your rotation. It's a damage spell you cast, but it's disconnected from the core Frostbolt, Flurry, Ice Lance loop. It's an AoE filler. That's exactly where Tilda can feel great. Disc Priest is a little different because our rotation is healing, not damage, but the same logic applies. We're looking at Power Word Shield, Penance, Flash Heal, Power Word Radiance, and Plea. Now, this is where things get interesting because we're going to end up rearranging these once we add cooldowns on top. For now, let's start with a baseline, our low or no cooldown instance on 1 and 2, so Shield and Plea. Our spammable no cooldown heal on 3, so Flash Heal, then another cast, this time with a cooldown on 4, so Penance. And finally, our longest cooldown with a cast on 5, Radiance. We're going to come back to this layout in a minute because once we start placing cooldowns above these keys, some of these are going to want to move. That's normal, that's our philosophy working. Next, we're going to fill in the shift row above your rotation. This is where your offensive cooldowns, burst abilities, and healing amps go. There are 2 principles that make this work. First, combo vertically. If a cooldown directly combos with the ability below it, put it on the shift version of that key. This is the strongest rule because it means your combos are always 1 modifier apart. Shift 2 into 2. Same finger, same key. Second, when there's no direct combo, order by sequencing. Cooldowns you press first on the left, second on the right. On Ret, we've got Wake of Ashes, Divine Toll, Execution Sentence, and Avenging Wrath if you're not using Radiant Glory. That's 4 cooldowns to place across our shift row. We'll start by putting Wake of Ashes on shift 4. This will always be followed up by a Final Verdict, and therefore the shift 4 into 4 combo makes the most sense. We can then position the rest in terms of the sequence in which they'll be used. Execution Sentence will always come before Divine Toll, which naturally leads to putting Execution Sentence on Shift 2, and then Divine Toll on Shift 3. This also feels good as Divine Toll works like Judgment. It throws out judgments and applies the same debuff. We can then slot Avenging Wrath onto Shift 1, which makes sense as it's literally your first global in PvE. Back to Frost Mage. Once again, things are simpler. We've only got 2 major damage amps, Frozen Orb and Ray of Frost. Frozen Orb goes on Shift 1. Just like Frostbolt below it, Frozen Orb generates your Fingers of Frost procs. Same function, same key. And there's a bonus. When Frozen Orb is active, it makes your Blizzard cast instant. Shift 1 is right next to Tilde, where we put Blizzard. They sequence into each other perfectly. Ray of Frost then goes on Shift 2. When bursting, you typically use Frozen Orb into Ray of Frost, so Shift 1 into Shift 2. And that's it for Frost Mage cooldowns on the Shift row. 2 binds, empty slots on Shift 3, 4, 5, and that's completely fine. Not every spec fills every slot straight away. They'll get used for other things later. Now, this is where the Disc Priest layout gets rearranged. Because once you start placing cooldowns above your core abilities, you might find that some of the base keys want to move, so the vertical combos line up better. Evangelism is a 45-second cooldown that makes your next 2 Power Word Radiance casts instant. That has to go above Radiance. Wherever Radiance is, Evangelism sits on the Shift version of that key. So if we keep Radiance on 5, Evangelism has to go on Shift 5. That's our first combo locked in. Now we'll put Power Infusion on Shift 2. It increases your haste and you use it early as a ramp. Pain Suppression on Shift 3, a 3-minute cooldown. And Ultimate Penance on Shift 4, a 4-minute cooldown that's basically a supercharged version of Penance sitting below it on 4. Now, if you wanted to stick to the philosophy a little more here, you could move Radiance to 1 and Evangelism to Shift 1. This way, you'd be closer to following the order in which these shift cooldowns are going to be used, as the shorter cooldown on Evangelism means you'll be using it earlier and more often. We then move Shield to 2 and Plea to 5, which would be very acceptable given that Plea is used very rarely in PvP now that all of your heals apply Atonement as a Disc Priest. Next up, Crowd Control. This is where F and G earn their keep. The philosophy is simple. F is your instant or short CC, G is your casted or longer CC, and the shift version of each key is the focus macro. That's it. The same pattern for every class unless you have a lot of CC, but we'll get to that later. On Ret, Hammer of Justice goes on F, Focus HOJ on Shift F, and Blinding Light goes on G. On Mage, we've got a bit more CC, so we'll want to think about the different combos available to us. We'll start with Dragon's Breath on T. Shift T will also be Dragon's Breath. There's no focus version, but we keep Shift T as the same spell so you don't train yourself into thinking your shift modifier of your crowd control is a different key when there's no focus variant available. This will also come in clutch later when we bind our mobility and interrupt. Anyway, we've also got Polymorph and Focus Polymorph, which we'll put on G and Shift G. And we've got Ring of Frost, which we'll put on F and Shift F. Same logic as before, with keeping the same bind on the focus key even though there's no focus Ring of Frost. And that leaves us with an easy combo, Dragon's Breath into Ring, T into F, or Dragon's Breath into Poly, T into G. On Disc, we've got Psychic Scream and Mind Control. The same pattern has us put Psychic Scream on T and Mind Control on G. Shift T is also Psychic Scream, same logic as Dragon's Breath, and Shift G is Focus Mind Control. And that's it. On every class, if we have some form of instant, sometimes AoE CC, we put it on T. Our signature CC goes on F, so our stun, and if we have a longer, sometimes casted CC, we put it on G. That's a warrior putting Shockwave on T, Stormbolt on F, and Intimidating Shout on G. Or a hunter putting Intimidation on F and Freezing Trap on G. Shift is always the focus version, so when you swap characters, your crowd control is always in the same place. Now that your CC binds are set up, the next step is learning how to actually use them properly. At SkillCap, we've got a full crowd control course that packages everything you need to know about CC in WoW PvP. It covers everything from the fundamentals of CC to advanced CC concepts, and even helps you test your knowledge and decision making. Next, it's time for the defensive row, Z, X, C, and V. As we mentioned earlier, if you're still looking for the perfect PvP trinket bind, it's time to set it to V. On every character, always. When you put your finger on V, the entire keyboard opens up. You can trinket and immediately follow it with nearly any other key. That leaves Z, X, and C for your major defensives. These are your panic buttons, the abilities with long cooldowns that you press when you're about to die. You don't randomly throw them out. Every one of these is a deliberate trade. Now, there's a distinction worth understanding here. There are 2 types of defensive cooldowns. Major defensives are the big ones: Ice Block, Divine Shield, Aspect of the Turtle. These are your I'm at 10% health and I'm going to die buttons. These go in this row. But some specs also have rotational defensives, shorter cooldowns that you press during combat to reduce incoming damage. Ice Barrier on a mage, Divine Protection on Ret. These are more like maintenance. You're pressing them proactively, not in a panic. You got a choice for how to handle those. You can keep all your defensives together in the same row, Ice Block on Z, Altered Time on X, Ice Barrier on C, everything in one place. Or you can split the concept. Major defensives stay in the ZXC row, and rotational defensives go near your rotation, something like Shift 5 for Ice Barrier or Divine Protection. That way there's a clear cognitive split between emergency buttons and maintenance buttons. Both approaches work, pick one and stick with it. Once again, let's walk through the 3 examples. On Ret, we can put Divine Shield on X, Blessing of Protection on C, and Lay on Hands on Z. Now, here's something interesting. Ret has defensives that can also be used on teammates. Both Lay on Hands and Blessing of Protection need to be used just as much on your team as they do on yourself. We did mention earlier that we wanted to avoid having modifier keys on our ZXCV row, but this is an exception that's worth considering, as we can use those modifier macros we mentioned earlier. Creating these for Bop and Lay on Hands lets us keep this current layout and doesn't get in the way of keeping explicit binds visible on our action bars because we're modifying it to use the same ability, just changing who it targets. And again, we're still keeping V free of modifiers, which allows us to do something like press Shift V plus Shift C at the same time to Trinket and use Bop on Party 1. There is, however, one other exception worth considering here, and that's putting something like your human racial on a modifier with your Trinket. Given that they basically share a cooldown and achieve nearly the same function, doing something like putting Will to Survive on Shift V is pragmatic and totally fine, especially if it feels good. Anyway, if you also decided to split rotational defensives, Divine Protection fits perfectly onto Shift 5 for Ret. On Mage, Ice Block on X, Alter Time on C, Trinket on V. If you're keeping everything together, you can shift Ice Block and Alter Time down so that Ice Barrier can go on C. If you're splitting, Ice Barrier can go on Shift 5 near your rotation. On Disc, we can put Desperate Prayer on X, and then Fade on C, as when you've spec'd into Phase Shift, Fade is basically a 1-second damage avoidance tool. With this, you can pair your PvP Trinket with Desperate Prayer by pressing V and X together, or Trinket plus Fade with V and C to avoid critical damage that would otherwise kill you if you were unable to press these 2 buttons together at the same time. At SkillCapped, we've got 8 courses dedicated entirely to defensive play, ranging from how to recognize danger to cooldown rotation and pre-using defensives. There's even an entire course on using your PvP Trinket properly, which will help solidify your new Trinket bind as a tool you actually know how to use. Next, we'll talk about where to bind your interrupt and mobility. There's a reason we're doing this together, as many classes will actually pair these together quite often. Think of a mage using Blink and a counterspell, or a rogue using Shadow Step and Kick. For this reason, it's crucial that you're always able to press your mobility bind and your interrupt bind at the same time. If you're looking for a go-to interrupt key, R is a great choice. It sits right next to your movement keys and is easy to chain with nearly any other key. You'll also then put your focus interrupt on Shift R. Same concept as your CC, 1 key, 1 modifier for focus. On Ret, that's Rebuke. On Mage, that's Counterspell. Disc doesn't have an interrupt, but if you played Arresto Shaman, that's Wind Shear. You could also put your interrupt on a key like Mouse 4, with the focus bind going on Mouse 5. If you did this, you'd also be ensuring that no matter what keybind your mobility was on, it would always sequence perfectly with your interrupt. And speaking of your mobility, we've got either Q and E or A and D depending on what you chose as your movement keys earlier. We recommend using this zone for mobility and some form of utility depending on your toolkit. On Ret, we start by putting Blessing of Freedom on E. We can then use Shift E and Control E for Party 1 and 2 Freedom. You've now got one key that handles freedom for yourself and both teammates. Divine Steed can then go on Q. It's right next to your Freedom key, which makes sense since they're both movement abilities. If you were playing a warrior, you could put Charge and Focus Charge on Q and Shift Q, Heroic Leap on E, and Intervene Party 1 and 2 on Shift and Control E. Again, as long as you're building something that feels right while sticking to a core philosophy that works across all of your alts, that's all that matters. For the other Q slots, Ret has a lot of teammate utility, so let's start to fill those in by binding Party 1 and 2 Blessing of Sacrifice on Shift Control Q. On Mage, Q is then a good bind for our Spell Steal, as it's the sort of utility that you want to flow well with your rotation, so putting it right next to your damage keys work best. We can then put Blink on E, which means we can start to create sequences from left to right that mirror what we might do in an arena match. For example, pressing Shift E, Shift R, and Shift T all at the same time would allow you to blink counterspell someone who may have been out of range while using Dragon's Breath on the person you blinked on top of, all while holding down the same modifier. Just like that, we've created a clean sequence of spells that's easy to wrap our head around and will make executing seemingly complex things in arena much simpler. On Disc, we can also put our Dispel on Q as a Help Harm macro. This will dispel debuffs when you're targeting a friendly target or buffs when you're targeting an enemy. Shift Q is then your Focus Dispel, and Control Q can be Mass Dispel, making your entire Dispel kit live on one key with modifiers. Angelic Feather goes on E for mobility, Shift E is life grip on party 1, Control E is life grip on party 2. Same party 1, party 2 pattern we used on Ret for freedom. Different spell, same concept being carried across specs. At this point, the core architecture is set. Your rotation, cooldown, CC, defensives, interrupt, and mobility all have homes. What's left is the class-specific stuff that doesn't fit neatly into a universal rule. And this is where we're going to be honest with you. This part is where the line between that makes sense and I have no idea what I'm doing starts to become blurry. There's no single right answer. On a serious note, you need to play around and find what feels good for your hands on your spec. But you're still working within the system. You're just filling in the remaining slots, adapting to your needs as you go. On Ret, the main things left are your healing spells, Word of Glory and Flash of Light. We also need to bind Blessing of Sanctuary. These all need Party 1 and Party 2 binds. The control number keys work well here if you went with that option. Control 1, Control 2, and Control 3 could be for Word of Glory on yourself and teammates. If you didn't take the control numbers, these will need to go somewhere else. We can start by filling in T, Shift T, and Control T with Sank. We'll come back to the heals soon. On Mage, the gaps are smaller. We've still got quite a few binds open, given that we had less core damaging abilities. 4 and 5 are free, and we've still got our roots to bind, so Frost Nova and Ice Nova fit nicely here. We can then put our Pet Freeze on Shift 4, and it's basically the exact same ability as Frost Nova on 4, except it can be used from range. If we put Ice Barrier on the ZXC area, this lets us put our Summon Water Elemental right next to the Pet Freeze on Shift 5. Again, we're at the point where it's just about trying to create a system that makes sense and feels right for you. Disc is the most complex, because you've still got your damage spells to place. Smite, Mind Blast, Shadow Word Pain, and Shadow Word Death all need good binds. And unlike other healers, you're pressing these constantly. They're an integral part of your rotation. This is where the control on numbers variant can really earn its keep if you find it comfortable. You could put Smite on Control 3, it's a cast, just like Flash Heal below it on 3, and Smite can proc a buff that makes your next Flash Heal instant. Mind Blast on Control 4, same key as Penance, and also works to buff your next Penance when cast. Shadow Word Pain could slot onto Control 1, 2, or 5, and Shadow Word Death somewhere alongside that too. With that, your damage binds are kept together on the same keys as your heals. If you didn't go with control on your numbered keys, these damage spells need to find homes in your remaining letter key spots. We could put Mind Blast on 5, given that it's an active part of your rotation, and as we mentioned before, buffs your next penance. Flee isn't used much anyway. Smite, Shadow Word Pain, and Shadow Word Death could then all live on R, turning it into an all-in-one damage bind. And this is what we mean by the two layouts branching. Same philosophy, same architecture, different choices about where the damage goes. Both work. You try them, you find out which one clicks, and you commit. This next section is the one that every other keybinding guide gets wrong, so listen up. First, there's something that you have to get on board with straight away. Focus Arena 1, 2, and 3. Everyone needs these. It doesn't matter if you're a melee, ranged, or healer. If you only bind one set of targeting macros, it's these. Your focus frame is the easiest way to CC a specific target without worrying about which arena slot they're in before pressing your ability. It's also the easiest way to keep an eye on incoming casts from a specific enemy. You need to be able to change your focus fast. And here's our best recommendation for where to put them. Mouse wheel up, mouse wheel down, and middle click. Doing this means that no matter what keys you need to be pressing with your left hand, you can always change focus and instantly interact with them. Think about it. Arena frames are stacked vertically. The mouse wheel goes up and down. It's intuitive. Top frame, scroll up. Bottom frame, scroll down. Middle frame, click. Or you can scroll up for Arena 1, down for Arena 2, click for Arena 3. Again, whatever clicks for you is what you should go with. Now, what you also put on your mouse wheel depends on your role. If you're a healer, you should instead put using your mouse wheel for targeting your teammates and yourself, so that's scroll up for party 1, scroll down for party 2, and middle click to target yourself. You can then put the Focus Arena 1, 2, 3 binds on Shift mouse wheel, which works out nicely given that Shift is your focus modifier key for using abilities on your focus target. Now, if you're a ranged DPS that's really trying to maximize their gains, you probably think you need Target Arena 1, 2, and 3 binds. But the truth is, most of you don't. This is especially true if you're just getting started with these binds. We highly recommend making your focus target selection with your mouse wheel become natural before considering using it for changing your target too. Until then, simply tab targeting and clicking on nameplates is completely fine. The skill capped UI also guarantees that you'll never accidentally tab target a pet with our smart tab targeting feature. This automatically swaps target nearest enemy to target nearest enemy player when you're in arena. This one setting change makes tab targeting become viable in arena, as you'll no longer accidentally be tabbing to a totem or a pet. Anyway, when you pick a target in Arena, you're picking them because their nameplate is in front of you. Nameplates tell you where someone is standing. Arena frames don't, and it's super easy to tab to the right target or quickly click on a nameplate. After all, you need to be able to quickly click on nameplates such as Grounding Totem or Spirit Link. The mouse wheel is also perfect for using abilities on specific players. Having a dedicated bind for dispelling Party 1, Party 2, and yourself as a healer makes a huge difference to how quickly you can dispel people, and putting this on something like Alt mouse wheel up, down, and middle click works really well. The same goes for DPS with a dispel, like mages with remove curse, and it's not just dispels. In fact, this is where we're going to put our last 2 utility spells for the ret, with control mouse wheel for Party 1, Party 2, and player flash of light, and Alt mouse wheel for Word of Glory. Again, these would also fit perfectly onto control 1, 2, 3 binds depending on whether or not you're using them. Another fantastic candidate for the mouse wheel are abilities that target specific enemies, especially spammable CC like Polymorph, Fear, and Cyclone. So putting Arena 1, Arena 2, and Arena 3 Polymorph on, say, control mouse wheel will make it seamless to CC anyone on the enemy team. And once more, these work just as well, if not better, on control 1, 2, and 3. The thing to understand here is that not all targeted crowd control needs to have an Arena 1, 2, 3 macro, especially if you're only just getting used to your binds. Specifically, the spells that really warrant being Arena 1, 2, 3 macros are the kind that you can cast on one person and then immediately start casting on another. For example, you might want to Cyclone Arena 1 and then immediately start casting Cyclone on Arena 2. This isn't something that you would do with, say, Mind Control, where you can't recast it while it's already on someone as you have to channel it. This alone makes Mind Control unnecessary to have it as an Arena 1, 2, 3 macro. Alright, we're almost done. A few last things to finish up. First, F keys, primarily F1 through F4. These are not great for abilities you have to use often, but for anything you have to press every now and then, they're great. Think class buffs, health stones, and other consumables in PvE. This stuff isn't worth overthinking. Just make sure everything you need to press in an arena match has a home somewhere. And you'll also want to bind your mount. We actually recommend putting it on a modified movement key, for example Alt-S, which makes it incredibly seamless to mount anytime you drop combat without having to move your hand away from your movement keys. And that's it! 1 philosophy, 3 classes, same hand position, same logic, different spells. If you followed along, your binds should already feel more organized than they've ever been. And next time you log onto an alt, you'll notice that your hands already know where to go. That's the system working. And if you're following along today and rebuilt your keybinds from scratch, there's one more thing that'll make sure this system sticks across every alt you play. The skill-capped add-on package configures your entire UI automatically. One install, and every character you log onto has the same clean, optimized setup. There's no need to spend hours configuring your UI when you can do it in seconds. Everything we offer is backed by our rank up guarantee. If you don't gain at least 400 rating while using our service, you'll get a full refund, no questions asked. So head on over to skillcap.com using the link in the description, download the add-on, and start climbing today. We hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll finally be able to set up some keybinds that you'll never have to change again. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.